Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Prof.Jeffrey Sachs Fan World. And here is today's content. When I look at the Chinese premier's proposal to the German chancellor calling for deeper cooperation in strategic industries, I see far more than a bilateral gesture. I see a quiet but profound shift in the global economic landscape. This is not simply about trade or another round of diplomatic pleasantries. It is about how two of the world's most important industrial nations are attempting to reposition themselves amid a fragmenting global order. From my vantage point, both China and Germany are confronting structural challenges that make cooperation not only attractive, but in many ways necessary. China faces slowing growth, demographic pressures, rising labor costs, and external constraints from U.S. technology controls. Germany confronts a stagnant European economy, high energy costs after the Ukraine conflict, and a manufacturing sector struggling to retain global competitiveness. When Beijing proposes closer strategic industrial cooperation, it is implicitly asking, can our respective vulnerabilities be transformed into complementary strengths? I interpret China's move as a recognition that the era of easy globalization is over. Fragmentation is accelerating. Supply chains are being weaponized. Washington is increasingly willing to use export controls, tariffs, and sanctions to shape the world's technological map. In this context, China sees Germany not merely as Europe's largest economy, but as a gateway to advanced engineering machinery, automotive excellence, and scientific partnerships that can help China climb the technological ladder. Despite U.S. pressure for Germany, the calculus is equally complex. Berlin knows that its industrial model cannot survive without global demand, and China remains its most important external market. German automakers depend heavily on Chinese consumers. German machinery and chemicals are deeply embedded in China's manufacturing system. A weakened Europe cannot absorb German exports. The U.S. market is increasingly protectionist. Thus, China's proposal is not a threat. It is an economic lifeline. But the deeper meaning of this cooperation goes beyond economics. It represents a subtle rebalancing of global power. If China and Germany align on strategic industries, electric vehicles, batteries, artificial intelligence, green technologies, they could form a powerful industrial axis capable of shaping global standards and supply chains. This would dilute the United States' ability to set technological rules unilaterally. It would accelerate the emergence of a multipolar industrial world rather than one dominated by Washington's preferences. In my view, this is the central geopolitical significance. Two manufacturing giants, each pressured by the U.S. in different ways, are choosing to diversify their dependencies by strengthening each other. Whether the world views this as stabilizing or destabilizing will depend on how wisely both capitals manage the balance between cooperation and rivalry in an era of global uncertainty. But it's not just the economic benefits. The two industrial powers' convergence on standards in EVs, renewables, or machinery could shape global rules in ways that are different from the U.S.'s priorities. This has profound implications. Whoever sets the standards today will control the global market tomorrow. Overall, it is clear to me that Sino-German cooperation in strategic sectors is not just a combination of two industrial models, but one of the driving forces capable of restructuring the world economy, opening up opportunities, but also posing many challenges to the current global order. When I look at the strategic partnership proposal between China and Germany, what strikes me most is not the pure industrial interests, but the political economic context in which this decision is made. We are witnessing a Europe pulled by two opposing forces. On the one hand, deep economic dependence on China. On the other, a security and values alliance with the United States. And in this vacuum, Berlin is trying to find its own way. From my perspective, Germany is at the center of three major fault lines in the global system: the US-China strategic confrontation, the weakening of the European Union, the structural crisis of German industry itself. In such circumstances, every choice Berlin makes is risky. If Germany goes too far with Washington, it risks sacrificing its core economic interests, where the Chinese market is the lifeblood of the auto machinery and chemical industries. If Germany gets too close to China, it will be accused of breaking the de-risking stance that the US and some EU countries are promoting. Every move by Germany, therefore, becomes a geopolitical signal. This is what makes China's proposal for strategic industrial cooperation so significant. Beijing is not just looking to rent German technology, it is sending Berlin a message: you can have a stronger industrial future if you don't completely align yourself with Washington. And Berlin knows it. I also see a contradiction within Germany. Industrialists, especially autochemical engineering groups, see China's rise as both a competitive challenge and a vital condition for their revenues. But politicians, especially after the Ukraine conflict, are under pressure to move closer to the US for security reasons. These two forces make Germany's China policy multi-directional, deep economic cooperation, but accompanied by tough political language. At the EU level, the issue is more complicated. France wants European strategic autonomy. Italy wants a softer policy towards China. Poland and the Baltics want to be closely tied to the US. In this context, any step Germany takes becomes a lever to shape EU policy towards Asia. German-Chinese strategic cooperation in green technology, AI, or electric vehicles will force the EU to choose between two directions: further trade openness or building an industrial defense Europe. From the US side, I see clear concerns. Washington has implemented a policy of friendshoring and de-risking with the aim of reshaping global supply chains to reduce dependence on China. But if Germany, Europe's largest economy, increases cooperation with Beijing in key industries, the US strategy will face obstacles. This could lead to new pressures on Berlin, from tariffs to threats to restrict technology. What worries me most is the possibility that Europe could become the arena rather than the agent of the new economic order. If Germany fails to develop a balanced strategy, cooperating with China but maintaining its strategic independence, Europe risks being forced to choose sides in the US-China rivalry. And this is the core question: can Berlin turn its cooperation with China into a proactive step forward for Europe's industrial future, or will it be caught in a geopolitical vortex larger than itself? When I look beyond the bilateral dynamics of China and Germany, what becomes clear to me is that this proposed cooperation sits at the crossroads of a much larger historical transformation. We are witnessing the slow but unmistakable unraveling of the old model of globalization, one dominated for decades by US-centric institutions, American technological leadership, and transatlantic economic alignment. In its place, a more fragmented, multipolar industrial world is emerging, and the deepening alignment between Beijing and Berlin in strategic industries is one of the clearest signs of this new order taking shape. First, let me emphasize a crucial point. A Sino-German industrial partnership would create a new gravitational center within the global economy, independent of both Washington and Brussels. China is the world's largest manufacturing system. Germany is Europe's industrial core. If they coordinate on electric vehicles, green technologies, hydrogen systems, advanced machinery, and AI-enabled automation, they do more than streamline bilateral trade. They generate a countermodel to the US, push for reshoring and technological decoupling. For many countries, especially in the global south, this offers an alternative pathway to industrial development, one less reliant on Western technologies and political conditions. Yet there is a deeper geological shift beneath the surface. If China and Germany jointly set standards for batteries, EVs, industrial software, green hydrogen, or solar equipment, those standards could spread globally, shaping markets and technological ecosystems far beyond their borders. Standard setting is the real currency of industrial power. Whoever defines the norms of the green transition will wield extraordinary influence over supply chains, capital flows, and development strategies worldwide. That is why Washington views such cooperation with strategic unease. Second, this emerging axis reflects a broader movement toward bloc formation. The United States is constructing a North American-centric industrial system built around semiconductor investment, clean tech incentives, and national security screening of foreign technologies. China is consolidating its own Asian and Global South networks through Belt and Road, energy partnerships, and trade agreements such as RCEP. Europe, however, stands at a crossroads. Will it move toward U.S.? When I examine the economic rationale behind China's proposal for deeper cooperation with Germany in strategic industries, what strikes me most is how profoundly complementary the two economies actually are. This is not a superficial trade relationship. It is a structural linkage between two manufacturing giants whose strengths and weaknesses fit together almost like pieces of a global industrial puzzle. And when two such economies begin to rethink their partnership in the middle of a shifting geopolitical landscape, the significance extends far beyond Beijing and Berlin. It reverberates across global supply chains, financial systems, and the future architecture of globalization. Let me begin with the most fundamental point. China brings scale while Germany brings precision. China offers an enormous domestic market, unmatched manufacturing capacity, and a state-driven industrial system capable of scaling new technologies at breathtaking speed. Germany offers engineering mastery, high-quality machinery, chemical expertise, and some of the world's best automotive and industrial technology. When these two forces converge scale and precision, speed, and quality, the result is a potentially formidable economic partnership. In sectors like electric vehicles, advanced batteries, machine tools, robotics, clean energy equipment, and industrial automation, Sino-German collaboration is not only logical, it is economically potent. German automakers are moving too slowly into the electric future while Chinese firms dominate battery production and supply chains. Joint research and production could push EV innovation faster and cheaper worldwide. Likewise, Germany's industrial machinery paired with China's digital manufacturing platforms and rapidly advancing AI capabilities could transform global production systems. But beneath these complementarities lie shared vulnerabilities, and this is where the logic becomes deeper and more strategic. China today faces slowing growth, demographic decline, and rising geopolitical friction. Its export machine is still powerful, but increasingly constrained by Western restrictions on chips, lithography, and high-end industrial software. Germany, meanwhile, is suffering from high energy costs, anemic EU growth, deindustrialization fears, and intensifying U.S. pressure to de-risk from China. German factories are struggling, German automakers are losing global market share, and Europe lacks the dynamism to compensate for these losses. Thus, both economies find themselves pressed on opposite sides of the same geopolitical vice. The U.S. push to reshape global supply chains in a way that curtails China's technological rise and redirects Europe toward American industrial priorities. In this context, deeper Sino-German cooperation serves as a mutual hedge. China hedges against U.S. containment by securing alternative technology partners. Germany hedges against economic stagnation by retaining access to China's market and industrial ecosystem. For both, the partnership softens the shock of a world fragmenting into competing blocs. However, the strategic industries under discussion, EVs, solar, hydrogen, AI, high-end machinery, are not ordinary sectors. They are the foundations of the next industrial revolution and the core of the global energy transition. If China and Germany set standards together, they can influence the trajectory of global markets for decades. This brings me to the global implications. A stronger Sino-German technological axis would challenge the U.S. ambition to dominate the green industrial frontier. It would create an alternative gravity center for developing countries seeking affordable green technologies. And it could accelerate the diffusion of renewable equipment and electric mobility worldwide, lowering costs for the entire planet. Yet this logic contains risks. Germany could become overly dependent on China for critical components. China, conversely, could become reliant on German industrial software and machinery. Such interdependence can promote peace or become a leverage point in future crises. In summary, when I analyze this partnership as an economist, I see a deeply rational alignment of strengths. When I analyze it as a political philosopher, I see a fragile structure shaped by both cooperation and pressure. And when I analyze it as a global thinker, I see a relationship whose consequences will shape not just two economies, but the evolving map of global power. When I analyze the proposal for deeper cooperation between China and Germany in strategic industries, I always come back to a fundamental fact. These are not just some niche areas of international trade. They are the foundation of the next industrial revolution, where green technology, artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, batteries, renewable energy, and automation will determine the economic strength of countries for decades to come. And I find that both China and Germany understand this very well. Let's start with electric vehicles, EVs, and batteries, the key sectors of the decarbonization era. China is far ahead of the rest of the world in lithium battery production, energy materials, and EV supply chains. Meanwhile, Germany has the longest automotive industry heritage, global brands, and world-class mechanical engineering. When you combine these two factors, China's scale and Germany's engineering prowess, we could be witnessing the creation of the most powerful EV industrial cluster on the planet. This could help accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels at a pace that Western markets would struggle to achieve on their own. But I also see challenges. German automakers feel intense pressure from Chinese EV brands, which can offer cheaper products and innovate faster. But rather than confrontation, strategic cooperation could be the path for Berlin to maintain its industrial leadership in a new era. Next up is renewable energy and green technology. China dominates the production of solar panels, wind turbines, and much of the equipment for clean energy systems. Germany leads in grid engineering, green hydrogen technology, system design, and quality standards. If the two countries truly work together, the global cost of clean energy could fall faster, giving developing countries access to cheap green technology, something I've always seen as a prerequisite for achieving humanity's climate goals. Another important piece of the puzzle is advanced machinery and automation. Germany produces the sophisticated machine tools that many modern production lines lack. China leads in AI platforms, industrial robotics, and large-scale digital manufacturing. At this intersection, I see the possibility of a completely new global production model, the smart factory, where German engineering meets Chinese algorithms, creating efficiencies that far exceed the traditional Western industrial model. Lead de-risking, or will it pursue selective autonomy by engaging China, where its industrial interests align? Germany's decision will heavily influence the answer. If Berlin leans toward deeper cooperation with Beijing, Europe may tilt toward a multi-alignment strategy rather than a strict Western bloc. If Berlin retreats under U.S. pressure, Europe could become more tightly bound to the American economic order. Thus, the Chinese premier's proposal is not merely economic, it is geopolitical, testing Europe's capacity to act independently in a world of great power rivalry. Third, as I consider the global implications, I see both extraordinary opportunities and profound risks. On the positive side, a Sino-German partnership could accelerate the diffusion of affordable green technologies, helping developing countries leapfrog into cleaner, more efficient systems. It could stabilize key supply chains in batteries, solar modules, and industrial machinery, offering the world a counterweight to protectionism and industrial nationalism. The risks, however, are just as significant. A tighter industrial bond may provoke retaliatory measures from the United States, deepening global fragmentation. Overcapacity in green technologies could spark new trade wars. Smaller economies may find themselves forced to choose between competing standards and supply chain systems. And most dangerously, economic cooperation could become entangled with geopolitical escalation if mistrust deepens between the major powers. In short, the global implications of this cooperation extend far beyond China and Germany. They reflect a world in which industrial power is shifting, alliances are fluid, and no single nation can dictate the rules. Whether this new order becomes more cooperative or more conflict-ridden depends on the political choices that follow. When I assess the potential consequences of a deeper strategic partnership between China and Germany, I find myself reflecting on a fundamental truth of the global economy. Every major transformation brings both extraordinary benefits and equally profound risks. The proposed cooperation between two of the world's industrial pillars is no exception. What may appear on the surface as a bilateral initiative is in reality a structural shift with implications for global development, climate action, technological diffusion, and geopolitical stability. Let me begin with the potential benefits, which are significant and far-reaching. If China and Germany integrate their strengths in electric vehicles, batteries, renewable energy, advanced machinery, and digital industrial systems, the world could gain access to technologies that are both cheaper and more scalable. For developing countries, often priced out of advanced green equipment, this could be transformative. Solar panels, grid components, electric buses, battery storage systems, and industrial tools could become dramatically more affordable, helping nations across Africa, Asia, and Latin America accelerate their energy transitions. This is a point I cannot stress enough. The battle against climate change hinges on cost curves, and Germany cooperation has the potential to bend those curves downward. Moreover, joint industrial planning between such major economies could stabilize volatile supply chains in critical sectors, especially batteries, rare earth processing technologies, high-efficiency engines, and hydrogen infrastructure. In a world rattled by geopolitical shocks and supply disruptions, such stability would be a global public good. Yet the risks are just as pronounced, and they stem from structural tensions in the international system. One obvious concern is the danger of overcapacity, particularly in electric vehicles, solar modules, and batteries. China already produces more than global markets can absorb, which fuels price collapses, trade frictions, and political backlash. If German engineering is added to Chinese scale output, could expand even further, provoking a wave of defensive tariffs from the United States, the European Union, India, and others. What begins as cooperation to accelerate green development may end as a trigger for new trade wars. Another risk is strategic dependence. Germany could become increasingly reliant on Chinese components, data systems, and supply chains, especially in EVs and industrial automation. China, in turn, may rely more heavily on German software chemicals and high-end machinery. Interdependence is not inherently dangerous. It can foster peace, but in an era of geopolitical mistrust, it can also become a source of leverage or vulnerability. A disruption in one country could cascade across the other and, by extension, across the global economy. There is also the risk that technological standard setting, if dominated by Beijing and Berlin, might marginalize smaller economies, creating new hierarchies in global trade. Countries unable to meet the new standards or integrate into the emerging supply chains may find themselves locked out of the next industrial revolution. Finally, I see an ethical dimension that is often overlooked. For cooperation of this scale to be legitimate and sustainable, it must respect labor rights, environmental safeguards, and long-term developmental goals. If pursued solely for industrial advantage, it could exacerbate inequality. But if embedded in a global framework aligned with climate goals, fair trade principles, and transparent governance, it could serve as a cornerstone of sustainable globalization. In short, the China-Germany industrial partnership has the potential to uplift the world or to divide it further. Whether it becomes a source of shared prosperity or global tension depends not on its economic logic, which is strong, but on the political wisdom with which it is implemented. As I reflect on the unfolding dynamic between China and Germany, their shared vulnerabilities, their industrial complementarities, and the shifting geopolitical order, I am reminded of a simple, enduring truth. The global economy is too interdependent, too fragile, and too deeply embedded in shared challenges for any great power to navigate this century alone. A strategic partnership between Beijing and Berlin could mark a turning point either toward a more cooperative global system or toward a hardened world of rival blocs and escalating tensions. At this juncture, the world faces two competing paths. The first is one of geopolitical instrumentalization, where Sino-German cooperation becomes another arena in which the great powers maneuver for advantage. In this path, every joint venture is read as a threat, every technological breakthrough as a weapon, and every supply chain as a potential fault line. The United States, perceiving a challenge to its industrial and technological dominance, responds with new sanctions, export controls, and pressure campaigns on Europe. China counters by accelerating its self-reliance drive. Europe fractures under internal disagreements. The result is a world divided into rigid blocs with rising trade barriers, duplicated supply chains, and a breakdown of global governance. Climate goals fade, development stalls, and mistrust becomes the currency of international relations. The second path, and the one I argue for, is cooperative development, in which China and Germany embed their industrial partnership within a broader framework that acknowledges the needs of the entire world. This is the path where joint innovation is tied to the global green transition, where standards are set transparently and inclusively, and where technological diffusion is deliberately designed to benefit the global South. Instead of reinforcing blocs, the partnership could become a bridge linking Asian dynamism, European engineering, and global climate imperatives. From my perspective as an economist, I believe the world desperately needs such bridges. The climate crisis cannot be solved without scaled production of clean technologies. The development crisis cannot be solved without affordable industrial equipment, transport systems, and digital tools. And the crisis of global mistrust cannot be solved without examples of cooperation that defy the logic of zero-sum rivalry. But this requires political wisdom, something in short supply today. Berlin must resist pressures to frame its economic choices through a Cold War lens. Beijing must prioritize transparency, sustainability, and genuine partnership, Washington must abandon the belief that industrial dominance can be maintained through exclusion, and global institutions from the G20 to the UN to the multilateral development banks must craft rules and financing mechanisms that integrate industrial policy with climate and development goals. Ultimately, the test of the China-Germany partnership will not be measured by how many factories are built or how many EVs roll off assembly lines. It will be measured by whether these efforts help steer the world toward a more stable, sustainable, and equitable future. If the partnership accelerates the energy transition, strengthens global development, and keeps open the arteries of globalization, it will be a force for good. If it deepens fragmentation or fuels new rivalries, it will worsen the world's already fragile trajectory. In this moment of global uncertainty, we must choose cooperation over confrontation, not because it is idealistic, but because it is the only path capable of addressing the shared challenges of our time.